Hey, this is Steve Guttenberg. Well, that guy's not Steve Guttenberg. That guy's John DeVore. My name's Steve Guttenberg, and we are at John's factory, in the listening room in his factory. There is beautiful speakers. Which ones are these?
These are prototypes for the orangutan reference.
Okay. And they will be shown at Munich in May, right?
Yes, that's what we're hoping.
You're not sure.
It's the race to the finish line at the moment, yeah.
Well, you know. But anyway, I came here with a plan, and I told John about it before we started shooting, and the plan was, because I don't want John to just talk about how great his speakers are. We already know how great they are. But I want to know, as a speaker designer, who are your heroes? Who do you admire? You know, who inspired you?
I have a few, definitely, that had lasting impacts. When I graduated from art school, I moved to New York, and I started working in 1988 at Stereo Exchange in New York City. And they were at that point, they were certainly the most famous, if not the biggest, used high-end audio store in the world.
Right.
So I actually got to hear everything. Whether or not they sold it new, it would eventually come in as a trade-in from someone. Lots of neurotic audiophiles in the city and in New Jersey, and everything would make its way through Stereo Exchange. So it was a really amazing and formative few years for me. I was already building speakers, and I was already really interested in it. And so for me, you know, taking famous speakers apart, whether they're Altex or Hartsfields or various panels and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the background, and that's sort of where I was.
That's a great education right there.
It was an amazing education, yeah. And then sort of having access, obviously trade-ins are not always in perfect condition, so something has to be gone through, maybe a driver's blown, or maybe something's loose in the crossover, and so there's always an opportunity to phone the designers of some of these things. So actually having conversations, oh, what are you doing in here? Or it looks like something's going wrong. Can you talk me through this schematic for a second? So actually getting, being able to pick the brains of some of the most well-known hi-fi designers of the time, 70s and 80s.
Wow.
So it was a great time. And a lot of those sort of individual speakers here and there made big impressions on me. One of them that we sold new at Stereo Exchange when I was there in '88 was John Bow's speakers, the Spica TC50.
Oh yeah, right.
We had those there.
Yeah.
TC50 was it's a legendary speaker, obviously, and it was amazing. I actually always found the one that came later on as a more affordable model. It was the SC30. Was kind of It was my favorite. It was really kind of a remarkable speaker. So that's one of the guys who sort of influenced me. And then as I got sort of a little bit more serious with my designs, I sort of there were a couple of really compact speakers that absolutely astonished me, and I couldn't believe them, and so they became obsessions as well. One of them was the Sonus Faber FM2. It was the original Minima.
Okay. And
it was a little Seos 11 FGX, which is their like a 4-inch woofer.
Okay.
And the famous Dynaudio tweeter. And that was one of the original Franco Serban. He was the founder of Sonus Faber, and so all of his designs shared a lot. But that was the one that really blew me away, and it was a tiny, it was a solid walnut, mighty box, but it was very compact, and that little 4-inch woofer just astonished. And then I heard another speaker with the same woofer that also blew me away by Joachim Gerhardt from Audiophysic. He was the founder of Audiophysic, and that was the original Step.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was another, just a tiny little two-way.
Right.
So those two definitely got me thinking, and those two speakers in particular put me in the direction of building what became the very first Gibbon. And this is obviously way before I started the company. a friend of mine who I was working with at the hi-fi store, he needed a pair of speakers. He wanted a pair of, you know, nice compact mini monitors. He was an imaging guy, and so I took my inspiration from these two really kind of very different but similar tiny mini monitors, and made a speaker with the Seos 11 FGX, and incorporating a lot of the stuff that, you know, I had been thinking of, and I actually named them Gibbons for fun. And a few years later, when I started the company, I called all my first speakers Gibbons basically because of those. So that was a sort of a direct link there.
But you know, I want to ask a question right there. So, so a lot of audiophiles think that so much of the sound quality is attributed to the drivers. So you named two speakers that use the same driver. I remember when it was the KEF 101 and
the B215.
Right, yeah. And that was also in the JR 149, and I think the Lin Can and some other speakers. And they all sounded completely different. Yeah. Because people used to come and say, what's the driver in there?
Those two speakers sound completely different. The only similarity was that they were two ways and they both used that woofer, but they couldn't have been more different from one another. You know, Joachim's speakers they made this unbelievable huge wall of sound on the wall that they were on from these two tiny speakers, and the Franco Serblin one had this meaty kind of delicious chocolatey sound. Yeah, they were completely different sounding.
So the driver isn't the primary. I mean, it appears to a non-designer, it would look like that's where a lot of the sound quality comes from, is the driver.
Right.
But it's really the box and the crossover, right?
The box, the crossover, yeah, the way you tune the driver.
Important, obviously, but it's not the driver.
Yeah, the driver is one of probably, you know, 5 or 8 elements that have maybe not equal value in terms of the final sound, but it's it's not the determining element by a long shot.
Yeah. Any other heroes?
Another one that we were selling at Stereo Exchange is the original Snells.
Oh yeah.
So Peter Snell's designs. He left the company, or I don't know if he.
No, he passed away.
He passed away while he was in the company.
Well, and he passed away.
Yeah. Well, I knew he passed away, but so he. By the time I was selling them at Stereo Exchange, there were only 1 or 2 that were strictly his designs, and a couple of the others were like Kevin Vex had sort of rejiggered them. They were still basically like the Snell E3 was still an A2, but with a couple of, you know, Kevin's ideas in there. But they were, those were wonderful speakers too. Just very flexible, easy to listen to, easy to just pop into rooms, amplifier friendly, and always really fun to listen to.
Now, as we discussed before we shot the video, Peter was sort of an admirer of Roy Allison.
Yes.
And Roy Allison had a thing about his speakers should go up against the wall.
Right.
Pretty much. So he knew, basically, he knew the boundaries, and therefore he knew a lot about how his speakers were going to be used, and they were more predictably the same from one room to the next.
That's right, yeah.
And Peter Snell was sort of doing it, not as rigidly, not as...
Well, he did it with the Snell A's, for sure, Not the other ones, not as much. And the Snell A's, in a system that is set up like that, so it's basically you walk into a room and there are 2 gigantic walnut refrigerators on a wall. That's a proper setup for Snell A's.
Right.
They can sound astonishing, but the ones that I'm like the E2 and the E3 are my favorites, and those are absolutely not like that. They're rear ported. They are set up like a normal speaker, you know, where you can tune tonal balance a little bit by moving them front and back, and you can also adjust soundstage depths and things like that. And so those are the designs that I admired most. Funny though, with Roy Allison is that the last pair of store-bought speakers that I ever owned before, so this was 1980, this must have been 1985, were Allison CD8s.
Oh, and what is that?
Those are, they got to be up against the wall. They've got the woofer is mounted on the top, and then and they're sort of like, they look like something in oak from Logan's Run. So they're sort of they're square footprint, tall columns, round woofer on the top, sealed, and then the front has sort of an oval shaped or a racetrack shaped grill on it, and inside there is a mid-range and a tweeter dome.
Oh.
And they're sealed, and they must be against the wall. And that, well, yeah, they were the last. You know, when I was in the hi-fi shop, I was comparing them to Pulp 10Bs and, you know, all the stuff that was out there at the time. And those, at least at that shop set up against the wall, they sounded best.
Wow.
But for me, you know, it's having a speaker that must be against a wall. While there's a lot of things to admire about that, for me, that's like the designer. It's way too limiting for setup, because if you don't put them that way, they don't sound right. The bass tuning requires them to have those wall boundaries in those exact spots.
Right.
And if you do anything to mess with that, then you get, it's kind of a disappointment, and the speakers will never sound really the way they're supposed to sound. So you lose a lot of flexibility. And to me, the Peter Snell designs that I like best are the ones where he was moving away from that. So away from the original Snell A, even though they were sort of a halfway between an Allison and his later designs, but like the E's, the Snell E's and the K's, and they were just killer all around speakers for me.
So, but another theme is the unknowns that the speaker designer faces, like the unknown of the amplifier.
Right, the amplifier,
so,
for sure. Yeah.
And, you know, starting with, I guess, is it tube or solid state?
Right. Yeah, that is absolutely something I
anticipate
address.
that? How do you deal with that?
That was one of the things that got me to start a company, actually. One of the things that I wanted to do, and so this is now, I've been selling hi-fi sort of through the late 80s and through the 90s. And there are speakers throughout this time that I find just astonishing and inspiring and amazing sounding. And then there are speakers that can be amazing, like let's say like an Altec, like an A7 or something like that. There's speakers that do all these various speakers that do certain things incredibly well and other things incredibly well, but nobody could ever put a voice of the theater in a normal living room.
Right.
It'll just never work. You have to sit really far away from them, and you know they need space to breathe. But then you could never really have like a pair of ProAC Response 2.5s with a single-ended 300B amp. So basically these things kind of coalesced, and the reason that I started the company, a big part of it, maybe 50% of it, was that I felt like I had something to offer, because I wanted to make speakers that were shaped like a Snell or a ProAC or an Audio Physics, something that was like a normal shape that people would put in their living rooms and admire the wood and all that kind of stuff, but they behaved in a lot of ways like those big Altecs or big Tannoys. Were very easy to drive, were sort of a textbook friendly amplifier load. So the impedance was a very linear 8 ohms. They were all like 89 to 91 dB sensitivities. And the idea being that you could use any amp you wanted. You weren't going to be restricted to, all right, well, these require a ton of current, like a pair of Apogee Scintillas, in order to get them to sound the way you want them to sound. So that it's something that since the very beginning, before I even started the company, I thought a lot about. So all my speakers have extremely predictable loads. All the Gibbons are very even 8 ohms. They like tubes or solid state. They're really designed to be sort of a textbook load, so you know how much power you're going to be getting. You know, they don't require high damping or low damping. They're just kind of regular, but easy. So you can drive them with 15 watts of Class A solid state. You can drive them with a single-ended amp. You can drive them with a 300-watt Hagel solid state amp. It's up to you, and you'll get the sound of the amplifier through them. The other thing that I thought of was that if I make the speakers as predictable and as easy to drive as possible, the amplifiers themselves will sound better. And if the amplifier sounds better, my speakers sound better, right? 'Cause, you know, in a hi-fi show, you walk into a room and it sounds terrible. it's always like, oh God, I heard those speakers. Those speakers are awful.
Yeah.
But it's like, if it sounds amazing, those speakers are the best speakers I've ever heard. But nobody ever gives credit to the rest of the system and the setup.
Right.
So I felt like it was almost cheating. If I could make my speakers really easy to drive, and I could just have them in the sweet spot of various tube amps or pure Class A amps, old something like a what was the old A1? The A1 that you could fry eggs on top.
Oh yeah, musical
fidelity A1s,
yeah.
right?
Right.
Those sounded amazing as long as they didn't blow up.
Right.
So you could get an A1, a used A1 on a pair of my original Gibbon 8s, and it would sound incredible. So yeah, that was a big part of thinking about the load and what kind of amps will be used.
So to finish up though, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you're done with a design?
When a design is done?
Because it goes on for months at least, right? So how do you know when you're finished?
Yeah.
Years, okay.
Yeah, no, that's another thing. As we discussed, I'm notorious for missing my product launch deadlines. Yeah, how do I know? One way I know actually is by announcing the product and racing as fast as I can to get them ready and bringing them to a show and hearing problems with them at the show, and going back and knowing them not done yet.
Okay.
I mean, so that's kind of that. Excuse me, I'm gonna do a water break here.
Okay.
It's very gradual. I know they're done when they never give me a moment like I just described at the Hi-Fi show when something's up. And I trace that down and find out what it is and go back to the drawing board, fix it. The speakers get brought to multiple rooms. They're listened to
I was
here.
just going to say, do you do that?
Oh, yeah. No, I listen to them here. I listen to them at home. I have a different room. Next door, Anthony at Box Furniture, he makes all my cabinets. He's got an office that I know very well, so they get listened to there. They get listened to. I've got friends in the city and friends in Jersey. So yeah, a lot of very different kinds of rooms they get listened to. Even some of the stores, dealers of mine that I've dealt with for a long time. I might go there and do some listening to those before the product is signed off on and starts to get made. So it's a very slow process. I don't think very many people do the design part of the equation as long as I do. I think it's a little longer than it maybe.
Yeah. Well, these are your children, right? I mean,
yeah, and once I let them out there, it's not like I'm going to be able to call the customers and say, you know what, I just realized there's something I could have done better, and try to get them back and pull them in. I never do Mark IIs. I never do, I never try to sell updates to customers who have speakers out there. I want them to be out there, and I want the customers who buy the first 10 pairs to be confident that their speakers are going to be the same as somebody, not these exactly, but the Orangutan 096 has been in production almost 8 years now.
Wow.
No changes. So,
yeah. I was thinking I'm gonna do a video about this, that audio speakers, amplifiers, good ones at least, that they have a life. They can have really long lives.
Yeah.
And they may be around after you, John DeVore, are gone, or the people that buy them are gone. I was at Stereo Exchange.
The heirloom thing, right? People that buy them will trade up. It'll be sold as used, or it will go to kids of theirs. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, like I was at Stereo Exchange to do a vintage audio story, and one of the pieces in the system they put together was an Audio Research SP3.
Right.
So maybe not, but the original owner of that SP3 may have passed on.
Right.
But that SP3 may go on to...
And you wonder how many owners it's had
already. How many owners
it
will have, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a fascinating thing, because what other, at least consumer products, do people buy that have those kind of lives? Certainly not cameras or computers or phones or televisions, right?
Yeah.
So audio's in a special category, and part of what I'm trying to do always is
it's
elevate
in a category
audio.
With sort of like with watches.
Watches, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, and some cameras, although once cameras all went digital,
well, then that's over.
It was thrown out the window, unfortunately. But lenses, maybe.
Lenses,
cars. have some of that. You know, some cars that you buy new now may very well be collectible or be worth fixing for 50 years. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing to think about.
So they should be thought of and valued that way. Is my point.
But then the EU treats them the same as a cell phone, right? I mean, you have to pay for the recycling of everything that's in the speaker to import it into the EU, with the expectation that in a few years it's going to end up in landfill. Right. So somebody who's going to buy a $200,000 pair of Wilsons has to pay this enormous tax in the EU because
as if it was
clearly they're going to throw away those Wilsons and get the next one in a few years, and it's going to take up a lot of space in that landfill.
That's very strange.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're done.
Great.
Thank you, John. And all that noise you may be hearing this is an actual factory. They're building stuff here.
We've got the doors closed, but the factory can get loud.
The factory continues. It might get loud.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, John. This is a pleasure. So this is Steve Guttenberg. I am Steve Guttenberg, and I am at the DeVore factory in Brooklyn, in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I'll see you again real soon, guys. Thanks.